Hello everybody, so the first session of this session will start. So two ladies from the psychology department will be going over their experience using peer-assisted learning, which is PAL, and kind of their overview as students and their student experience as well.
So just a quick overview of what we're going to go through in this presentation so you don't get lost. So we're firstly going to introduce you to the concepts of group learning, co-creation and peer-assisted learning, because they'll be key to understand this presentation and our experience. We're then going to introduce our specific peer-assisted learning scheme that we use within the psychology department. And then we're going to talk about the transferable skills that we gained from being PAL leaders and working within the department. And then we're going to give a final overview of the scheme and kind of what we're going to do taking it forward next year.
Okay, so just to start, I'm going to go over why we're motivated to use group learning in academic settings. Students might benefit from group discussions with their peers and group work in their courses. There's evidence that interacting with other students and with your lecturers improves student retention and student satisfaction. For PAL specifically, peer-assisted learning, students might feel more positive and confident in their learning if they're being supported by an older student who's gone through the same process before. There are a lot of documented benefits of group learning, including developing critical thinking by having those group discussions, problem solving by resolving any issues that arise within the group working and self-directed learning, and it is viewed positively by a majority of students. In one study, they had to work on a translation together, and 93.2% of the group viewed the group work positively. Some of the advantages of group learning: it allows for the sharing of ideas and diverse viewpoints. When you're in a lecture, it will just be one person lecturing their opinions to you, but when you're discussing in a group, you get a lot of different viewpoints and backgrounds. This was helped in peer-assisted learning because there were 3 of us, and also the students all communicating with one another. Also, presenting your own ideas and arguing for your points about a topic helps you to consolidate your understanding. And co-constructing ideas with multiple people has a higher cognitive capacity than just the individual, so you're able to capture more details and knowledge about the topic to get a more nuanced view.
So in terms of disadvantages, clashes of opinions can be a big one, especially if people prefer to work individually or they're just not used to working group working. So I think PAL kind of really combated this because it gave them kind of a model of like a positive teamwork environment they could then take forward and feel more positive about this. Some students may also just not like participating in big sort of lecture settings or seminar settings where it's more formal, whereas PAL was completely student-led, so it was very informal. There was none of this kind of put your hand up, say, kind of, answer the question. It was very sort of just jump in when you want to, so we think that was really positive. Also, we had a lot of time to kind of discuss and go over different things. We had the whole hour session each week, which is really good because often you only get like 5 to 10 minutes to discuss in group settings and seminars and things. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to peer-assisted learning before we go on to like specifically what it's like within the psychology department. So loosely, it's a form of collaborative learning. So it's a different approach to teaching because it has the student at the centre of it. So the student is sharing knowledge, advice and ideas and resources. It's been used at many different levels of education, so we've just got some slides there. Obviously we used it in a higher education setting. And there's evidence that it has positive impacts on academic attainment, confidence and also just team working skills as well, which these are like medical citations here, but obviously that's really useful for lots of different careers like business, teaching. Team working is a big part of a lot of jobs.
So the things that we were helping the students with were their mini projects, which are 2 second-year research projects. You've got one for brain and behaviour, which had things like studying Stroop effects, and one for perception and cognition, which was like studying ratings of attractiveness. And it's a full research project in a group of around 6 or 7 people. It includes like ethics form, project planning, collecting the data and analysing it, and then presenting the results. One topic is presented as a poster, the other one as a video presentation. A big part of the challenge of the mini projects is dealing with psychopie. This is a psychology experiment program that is a bit notorious for being very difficult. It's based on Python, which was very hard because a lot of people didn't come with any coding knowledge whatsoever.
So this is just a timetable of basically the sessions that we have. So it goes right through from week 2 to the end of week 10. It's kind of small, maybe you can see it. Basically it goes from like an introduction, and then at the end we have this like presentation resources. So looking at creating posters and videos that they're going to present. So these sessions ran in parallel with the sessions that they got from the lecturers and the GTAs, so that if any issues kind of arose in those sessions or questions, we could then answer within our sessions.
So one of the great things about peer-assisted learning is co-creation between students and staff. The PowerPoints that we used for general advice were based on our own experience of the mini projects and what we would have liked to know, and also from Supervisor Trish and Karisha, who informed us about things that specific students were struggling with a lot that we were able to aim that general advice at. And that was also with one-to-one support that we were giving students, which were informed by our own challenges. And students had input too into the structure of the sessions. We asked them if they wanted the session to be more general advice or more targeted one-to-one advice, and they influenced the structure of it in that way.
So in terms of transferable skills that we personally gained from the scheme, we split this into hard and soft skills, so I'll just run through the hard skills quickly. So it allowed us to gain a deeper understanding of research procedures, so ethical forms, participant collection, that kind of thing, which is really important because actually our ethics forms are due in tomorrow for our dissertation project, so that's really relevant at the minute. And also public speaking skills, because I wouldn't have been able to do this probably before I did PAL, because I didn't really used to like public speaking. But obviously we were delivering sessions in front of students, so we kind of had to get used to doing that and be clear in how we were speaking. Also teaching skills is a big thing, so just the ability to kind of explain something in a way that makes sense to other people, not just you, which can also really help with consolidation of learning. Development of teaching and advertisement materials, really handy for the department because they can use those in in years of the future as well, so that's really useful for them. And leadership skills, because although we were supported to plan the sessions and we had support during the sessions if we needed it, they were very self-run by us basically, so kind of how we wanted to do the sessions.
In terms of the more general soft skills, we developed a lot of team working skills. We worked really closely as a 3 and with Trish to work on all the presentations and discuss what we wanted included together. We also had developed really good problem solving skills, especially with things like PsychoPy, where the error codes can be very specific and you need to identify those problems and resolve them either by yourself or sometimes by signposting. Trish was always available for issues that we didn't know how to answer or felt out of our depth with, and that was a really great resource. In terms of flexibility, like I mentioned before, students were able to tell us if they wanted the general advice or the one-to-one feedback, so we switched between those two learning styles. And sometimes they came to the sessions with questions that were outside of the realm of what we were covering in that session as well, so we had to be flexible in that way.
So in terms of just a general overview of the scheme, that's everything we do from now on will kind of just be how we found it, I guess, and what we're doing next year. So strengths, it was a safe space for the students to come and ask questions, because often perhaps if they were 5 or 6 weeks behind where they should be in terms of their projects, they maybe didn't want to go to lecturers, so they could come to us instead, because obviously we're not going to tell them off or say why are you so far behind. Yeah, Karisha will. So that was a nice thing, because we got a lot of people towards the end, I guess, when they were stressing for the projects we're doing really soon. It also created a really nice community, so students were not only coming to us and asking different questions, but they were talking to each other as well in different groups, solving each other's problems, which is really nice. I think that's really beneficial after COVID and everything, just being able to kind of speak to each other again actually, and not have breakout rooms when no one talks. So yeah, and then just in general for us, it was really nice to get experience teaching within the department. Some of us want to go on to be GTAs and teachers, so that's really beneficial.
One of the major weaknesses was turnout. It was very varied, but often quite low, which wasn't necessarily always a bad thing, because we were able to give extremely specific feedback and work really closely one-on-one with people, especially because there were 3 of us, which might be something that a lecturer or even a GTA might not be able to commit that much time to because of how many students they have. Students did often opt to reach out to their GTAs for things that we were covering in our sessions, which maybe because they had no familiarity with us really, and might have also been a lack of trust in us as an information source. In terms of session planning, sometimes it didn't quite match up with students' needs. Like I mentioned, sometimes they came in with things that were not what we'd planned for that session. A lot of psychopie support during poster and video sessions. And the session structure, often general advice wasn't needed because that was often covered in the lectures. Often it was that one-to-one support that they were really wanting out of the sessions. Overall, PAL had a positive impact for the students, getting one-to-one informal feedback, and PAL leaders alike in getting the experience of teaching in the department. Future years are going to be informed by our experiences this year. So our highest turnout by far was for psychopie support. So we're going to aim to offer more support on those areas and throughout the term. And also include PAL leaders as TAs in an introductory session and in an ethics form session, which might just help familiarise them with us and also create trust in us as someone who is there to help them.
So just a little conclusion to wrap everything up. So from what we found and from what the literature suggests, PAL is the next step in collaborative learning. So having students as teachers is really effective alongside GTAs and lecturers, as they can offer additional one-to-one support. And we found it was very easily integrated, like minimal. There was only 3 of us that needed to do it, so that was a really good thing. And it just creates like a really nice informal environment, because quite often we have people that will speak to us about things that perhaps weren't linked to the projects, but maybe they were wondering whether they wanted to do like an integrated masters, that kind of thing. And obviously we have the experience of that. So it was nice to kind of combine the cohorts as well, because that's something we don't get to do often. So thank you for listening, and if you've got any questions.
Great, fantastic thought, guys. Of course, I'm biased. You've left enough time for about 7 minutes of questions, so if anybody wishes to ask anything, please go raise your hand.
Just a question, a bizarre question.
Yeah.
Yes. We
well,
were
I
paid.
know there have been past students in the past that haven't been paid.
Yeah. No, we were one of the lucky ones.
As part of the inclusive learning team strategy, they developed a team and thought process for PAL. So if you do get in touch with them, you'll be able to probably have it in your department as well.
Yeah. It was really great because sometimes, like with voluntary things, it can exclude people who need to earn that income in their spare time. So it really helped those people be included as well. Who doesn't like getting paid?
The dashboard is really hard to navigate. So.
Sorry, are you carrying on next year as well?
Yeah, I
So
think so.
you'll be, you two are, you three, sorry.
Yeah, Emma's at an internship. She's here in spirit.
Next semester, the main projects are changing, so this was all year, so it's 10 weeks, thank you. I just need sort of blood is just not it. It was 10 weeks, 4 weeks, for 10 mini projects for 3 weeks, so the girls are going to have 3 weeks of intense. In the introduction, give drop-in sessions to the next one. In the introduction to the next part, give drop-in sessions to the next one. But they're already trained, so we don't have to spend time training them with it, and it's going to be focused on the ethics, the psychopie, and facts, because we have to incorporate facts into one of them this year. So it's going to be a lot more based on what we learned this year. It's going to go on, but because they know it, we're going to try to keep them on to the 4th year.
Just out of curiosity, how does the technical system learning?
Well, I guess we have a deeper understanding of ethics forms and things now, because we were kind of looking, so they'd get feedback from their supervisors on the ethics forms, and then we'd get them, and then they'd be like, look at this, like we'd have to kind of solve it or, kind of help them with that. So I guess that's a big thing for us, because we kind of know what goes through ethics approval now, because we've seen these forms and things. The psychopie, I mean, if any of us choose to use that again in the future, we can read like different error codes and stuff now. Like, it's really nice when you manage to solve an error code. It's very fulfilling. So, yeah.
You have a question?
Yeah, did you say that this is the second year?
Their second year is what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, the PAL, we've got one out that and it's for first years.
Okay.
So this is the first time I've seen it for second year. Do you think because when you're saying things about asking you other things about the first year have lots more questions like that.
Yeah, I think it would be beneficial, like if in the future. But the projects for first years are slightly easier as well. I think there's sometimes more errors that come up in the second year projects. It's more technical.
And I think as the second years, all of us 3 are integrated master's students.
Yeah.
And the second years, when is it that they have to decide whether it's integrated
It's
or
pretty soon in second year, so that's quite helpful. There was one guy that stayed for like the whole hour and he was just asking us loads of questions on integrated masters. And then he left the session, so that was really helpful, so that was quite nice.
I think it's really good because there is a lot of support for first years and then it's sort of a bit of a nervous thing. Second years have a bit of a dip and a wobble, so I think it was really good to have time. You've got me thinking about your coding. in the second year is really good to see.
Sorry, we're now thinking about like career as we could have an extra like come ask us anything else, but career is one of these things you can come and ask.
Yeah, because I think people did have questions about that because this guy was like, what's the point in an integrated masters? And I was like, well, so these are the benefits of it. Yeah.
In general, like in the department, do you have like kind of teaching feedback sessions? But again, I did mention that we have kind of PBLs where you probably start to teach kind of theories and then this week might be my week to teach to everyone. Is that like embedded in the course of discussions?
It kind of depends what modules you do. So in the third year modules, I'd say kind of like in the forensic module, we get a topic and then we get put into a group and we have to present it in front of the class. And in clinical, we get case studies each week, so kind of similar to medicine, and we have to present those in front of the class. But I think some modules, I don't know if you had as many presentations in yours.
Not as many, I don't think.
Because you can only enjoy. So I don't like to sit through presentations, so I don't give presentations. Not this one. I love this one.
You went for my forensic one.
No, I mean like every week when you give students presentations on papers, I find it gives them a lot of intense pressure to prepare for it when you can give them something else that they engage more deeply with. So I stay away from presentations. But there are modules where that is just standard and they have a presentation each week. So it does vary based on the module you've chosen.
You sat through my forensic one though. Did you enjoy it?
That wasn't my module, that was John's module. And I did pay attention for the first 5 minutes every single time. You realize my questions were always on what you covered in the first 5 minutes.
It was a good question though, so I was like, it was one I could answer, so I was happy about it.
But this just developed our skills in that presentation style a bit more because honestly, when I did have to present, there were no questions. Like people just wanted it to be over with pretty much. But here, people were really coming for support and asking for specific questions. So being able to give answers to those questions has really helped. Like here, it's really helped.
Yeah, maybe we can do more things like this in the future.
I think the main reason why we want to continue this on as well is so on top of being their line manager, I was also GTA across all of the mini projects of both first and second years, and we found there was a massive disconnect between the second years asking for support compared to the first years. I think they're a lot more comfortable asking GTAs and tutors for assistance, whereas in second years we're a little bit more, I guess, shy about it. So they kind of had a direct source, but it also alleviated the pressure from GTAs to like go and direct them to PAL students while they're dealing with other things, which was quite helpful. Cool. Awesome, great. I think we're ready to move on to the next day. Perfect, Rachel.
Thank you. I feel very old watching you talk about it. I've been teaching for 33 years now, so I've been doing this a long time. At the very end of my career, I'm finally trying to find out how students really learn and complete my doctorate, so it's nearly there. So I'm going to talk about unlocking meaning using visual metaphors. I work at the university here. I work in the International Pathway College, where most of my work involves preparing graduate international students to go and take master's courses in the Business and Society School. And most of my students are Chinese. So I'm going to talk about meaning. And the door to understanding does not automatically fling itself open when we try to communicate with students. I'm quite mindful of two particular types of concepts that my students either need to know or find difficulty with. One of them are what we call threshold concepts. So I need to make sure my students are ready for the next stage of their learning. So if you wanted to study a master's in accounting, then you need to know what assets and liabilities are. The more problematic are abstract concepts. I'll just move that chair. So these are the more difficult ideas that we all teach. They're the more slippery concepts that are difficult to pin down. They might not have a physical form. And my subject area of management and economics is full of them. Ideas like risk, motivation are quite difficult, and particularly for international students, they're quite challenging. So one of the ways, many of us are experienced teachers here, one of the ways that we can teach these very difficult concepts is to use an assimilative approach to learning. So we can take a constructivist approach where we take something the students already know and try and build that in with something we're trying to teach them. And trying to teach students something completely new from zero is extremely difficult. And one way to do that is to use a metaphor. So this is probably the most words I'm going to put anywhere in my presentation, but I quite like this definition of metaphors. Metaphors are basically explaining one thing using something else. And the idea is that by using that something else, we can make the understanding easier or maybe more interesting as well. And of course, nobody's better at using metaphors than Shakespeare was. Maybe this is bringing back horrible memories of school. But Shakespeare was very good at creating colourful, metaphorical language. All the world's a stage, Juliet is the sun. Really quite complex sometimes, layered meanings in metaphors, but a way to kind of communicate very complex and interesting ideas. But I'm interested in going a little bit further, and one of the theories that has underlined my research has been probably the best known theory of metaphor, which is by Lakoff and Johnson, conceptual metaphor theory, which in its most basic form says that we use a source domain, so something familiar to us and concrete, to try and explain something that is a target domain, which is unfamiliar or abstract. And that sounds very theoretical, but actually what they said was we use metaphors all the time in our language, in our communication. In fact, without metaphors, it's really difficult to communicate. So I'm moving through my presentation, but I'm really moving nowhere. So once you start looking at metaphors, you realise that we use them in almost every sentence. But I want to go a little bit further than that. So I've been looking at the use of pictures and images as visual metaphors. So I'm wondering whether by using pictures I can further influence my students' ability to understand and learn, particularly in real time, where I'm trying to communicate large quantities of difficult concepts to them. And while we teach in lots of different ways, we still use lectures, we still have explanations where we're talking, and situations like this one. So I'm interested in visual metaphors as a way of doing that. And I quickly realised about 5 years ago when I started my research that when I'm trying to collect data, it's not as easy as I thought. I'm a very experienced teacher, but I wasn't a very experienced researcher. And I thought this would be quite easy. I'd run some focus groups, I'd show students some pictures, we'd have some fantastic conversations about learning, meaning, understanding, knowledge. And it was really, really difficult. So it was more like this. And I had to think about creative ways of trying to get my students to talk about their learning. Otherwise, all I would come away with was, yes, we like your use of these images, it seems to help us, and very little more. So I'm going to tell you about some of the techniques I've used. I'm going to talk about two briefly in this presentation. The main one was to use something called process interviews. See, I've written a little paper on that you can look at later if you want. I'm dropping myself, how arrogant. But these are semi-structured group interviews that are punctuated by students completing tasks. So the idea was they complete a task, they can speak their own language. Most of my students are Chinese, so they can speak Mandarin if they want to, and then they bring the results back, and then we talk about the results fresh from them having undertaken some kind of thinking process. So I'll show you one example of the kind of task that they did. This is the end result of a Diamond 9. If any of you have worked as school teachers, this is a common technique used to get students to show analysis and evaluation and to categorise ideas. So these were all lecture slides that they'd seen me use where I'd introduced ideas, and I got them to organise them according to the ones that were most useful and least useful. You can see the group over there, many, many groups of students that I interviewed. And so they could complete this, and then we could talk about the results. Of particular use was what they put at the top, and even more useful at the bottom. So what they deprioritised, what they had to rubbish about my teaching and say, these pictures were not useful to us, and explain why, again, was very useful to me and quite meaningful. So I'm going to show you a few pictures at this point. I'll show you some images that were analysed through the process of these interviews. And I'll show you one that worked very well, one that kind of worked and one that doesn't work, and then I'll try and explain to you why I think some visual metaphors are good for communicating meaning and some are not so good. And then I'll show you maybe how you could do this. So this first one, if we were running this as a workshop, which I have done in the past, I could get you all to guess what that's trying to show. But I use this as part of a recorded lecture where I was talking about teamwork. Did you guess it correctly there? Yeah. Okay. And my participants said this was a really strong visual metaphor. They could relate very easily to the activities of the bees. It was familiar to them. They know how bees behave. There's also something about the anthropomorphism of animals. Lots of animal pictures were very appealing, and the way we can kind of transfer our feelings and behaviours into animals, whether that be bees or elephants or whatever. And also they said it was quite easy to transfer this behaviour into the context of a business situation where it was busy, frenetic, looks disorganised, but maybe things get done. And so that was a very strong visual metaphor. One that was a little bit more confusing was this one. I was teaching them about control in the context of management, and I showed them this picture. And they said, this is sort of useful, but it's got problems with it. And one of the problems is it really control that's taking place here? Which probably some of you immediately thought, that's what happened. So who are they controlling? Are they protecting somebody? Are they defending somebody? Is this just a drill? Where are the people they're controlling? There's something missing from the pictures. And one of the features of a really good visual metaphor is it's got enough information in the picture. I don't want students to have to think for very long about what this means. So that one came along with a warning that it didn't work particularly well. And one that I thought this was going to be a great idea that didn't work well at all. I came into a seminar and a group of my students were talking about the British royal family and the arguments between them, and they seemed very knowledgeable and interested in this. So I was teaching about stakeholders and stakeholder conflicts, and I thought I would use this picture. Of course, you'll recognise the conflicts within that perhaps. And they said that's very confusing because the royal family are the leaders of Britain. They are the leaders. So that's the word that comes to mind, leadership. So that was very confusing. So there's a kind of cultural issue as well with using a picture like that. So I've got lots of facets of strong metaphors, but if I just show you some of them that I think are quite important. Good metaphors need to have some familiarity. They need to be recognisable and they need to be relatable. Anything that's complicated, where you're scratching your head. When I've run this with teachers like complicated metaphors, I think, and quite like developing ones that are really clever. But students don't seem to like that. They just want a very quick fix to understanding. So the images need to have more immediate meaning to them. So nothing strange or unfamiliar. Connectability between the source and the target domain needs to be really clear. What am I using the image for? Again, if we're spending too much time talking about that, it defeats the point. I may as well just have a list of bullet points instead. The parts of the picture need to be sufficient to communicate meaning, but not too much. Sometimes I've used pictures with too many elements to them. And also, the idea needs to be transferred into the domain of the subject matter. So, whether, for me, that's business and management and economics. If that can't happen, then it's just decoration. It's just putting Homer Simpson on the slide because it looks funny and it's just seductive and drawing your attention away from learning. And also culture. I've found some fantastic insights into my students' culture through my research. I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment, if I've got time. But also we need to be careful about not offending, about appropriateness, about not using images that are quintessentially English to an international audience that wouldn't make any sense. So, temperature warning. I'm going to explode. Yeah. So I'm going to show you, because this is a teaching and learning conference, I'm going to finish by showing you a couple of ideas you could try that are really easy. The first one I used as a research method itself, and that was the main intention of it, which was to use metaphor elicitation, which originally was a market research technique. It was a kind of very complex multi-stage process. But all I did, I created a deck of Google Slides. I put concepts on. So in management, there are lots of kind of models and matrices of difficult ideas. and I put my students' names on them, sometimes in pairs, and I said, for the next seminar, find a picture, paste it in, you're going to explain the concept to the group using your picture. To begin with, the lazy students just put the concept in Google, click image, and paste it on, but they quickly realise they're going to look a bit silly, and there's a real competitive element emerges for finding something quite meaningful to convey images, convey meaning. And I found some really interesting insights into my students' culture. They were using pictures from their culture and enjoying me taking an interest as well. We got really quite close through this whole process. And it's easy, it's quick, students like it. I asked them, they like it. It's easy, it's not difficult homework. And the other thing that you can probably see I've been trying to do all the way through this presentation is when you introduce an idea or a concept, show a picture. Show a picture, something big and vivid. This looks fantastic on a big lecture screen. And again, you might want to think, why was I using this picture? Just to show adaptability. Maybe you could guess that. But again, when you're introducing an abstract or difficult idea, it's an easy way in. It's not going to be the whole lesson, of course, but it is a way of introducing an idea to students. And it seems to work, seems to be very effective if the images are chosen carefully. I've got some references, of course, like a good student, but I'm wondering, does anyone have any questions? Anything anyone wants to ask?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you use the image, do you then have a screen with words, or do you just talk over the image?
Yeah, I did a little bit of research about how much information to put alongside an image. It's quite difficult to be sure. But I would normally do, like that last slide, I would put a picture, briefly talk about the concept, and show the name of the concept. So that kind of fits in with dual channel theory and making sure it's not too much information, but for somebody who needs to know the word itself, it's not overloading them, it's not cognitive overload.
Because in our department, our students are going to be very reticent to not having words on a screen. Right?
But it wouldn't be the whole presentation or the whole set of instructional design. It wouldn't.
So that's what I'm asking. Do you then give them words of a definition?
Yes. So I might show an image as a way into talking about it in more depth.
Okay.
Yeah. It wouldn't be. I've deliberately just made this all pictures.
Okay.
To make a point.
Okay.
but yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So I've done some research with East Asian students, particularly those who speak Mandarin. Do you find that the language that the student uses has an effect of the metaphor? So maybe the metaphor is less effective based on the language. If there's like a different.
Do you mean the metaphor they choose?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's more direct, often more direct. So less subtle. I'll give you an example. I gave the students a concept, figurehead, which is quite a weird abstract concept really, the idea that somebody represents an organisation but it's just the face. And they found a picture of Pu Yi, which if you watched The Last Emperor of China, and they put a picture of Pu Yi as a small child because he became emperor when he was a small child. So that was a very culturally specific picture, which, I mean, isn't it wonderful when you have a big class and everyone goes, like that, and it immediately was recognisable by them. So all I could say is I think some of the images were very direct and culturally placed.
Why do you think the animal ones seem to be more popular?
Well, I've tried to research this as best I can in my thesis. I've got a section on anthropomorphism. And there is lots of research about how we imagine animals feel our emotions like we do, and that their behaviours mirror us. If anyone's a dog owner, you look into your dog's eyes and you imagine they're thinking more than they really are, and that's a very powerful thing. If you're trying to create emotions around animals, showing their eyes looking at us, and it's the eyes maybe that have something about it sometimes. But yeah, we do feel anthropomorphism. I think we think that animals have the same kind of behaviours that we do in many ways.
I think using animals is, like you were saying, about not wanting to get something wrong in the culture that you might not be aware of. It feels safer, doesn't it? Because and maybe in a way, if you're showing a picture there and everybody's you know, in a specific way, I might feel disenfranchised because it's elephants.
Yeah.
I've not sort of seen myself.
Yeah.
I have seen myself, but I've not seen myself.
Yeah.
So I think it's- yeah.
Well, some animals, I showed some, I can't remember what it was for now, a picture of some penguins, and that seemed quite unfamiliar to my students, whereas a group of elephants was very familiar.
So in the animals, there's some more popular.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I think that's all the time
Thank
we
you.
have for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, how to revise or how not to revise, that is the question that we're going to think about today. So I'm Jessica Hargreaves, I'm a lecturer in the Maths department. We've got James Kewley, who's one of our PAL leaders, who's going to appear on a video at various points to give the student perspective. And we've got Sue Russell, who, go on, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Academic Skills Manager. I work in Learning Enhancement Team, which is part of Library, Archives and Learning Services, and not Language and Linguistic Science, which they put on my badge, which is why I've taken it off. So it's LALS, but it's Library, Archives and Learning Services.
So what we're specifically going to talk about is some study skills / revision workshops that we've run this academic year. That's been very much a collaborative process, which we'll talk about. So we'll talk about why we decided to run these workshops in the first place. We'll briefly give you a taste of what the workshops entailed. Then James is going to give you the student perspective. He helped us design and deliver the sessions as well, which leads us nicely into the student feedback that we got from the people attending the sessions, and then our facilitator reflections as well, which we'll draw together to give you some key takeaways so you could think about applying these ideas in your setting. But really what we wanted to take this opportunity for was we're thinking about what we're going to do next year, and we'd really love to hear your opinions on some questions that we've got about it moving forward. So then, why did we decide to start running these workshops? Well, the theme of this conference is the student journey and supporting students through that. An assessment is a fundamental aspect of that experience. And many students, I think, at any point in history, are anxious about exams, varying degrees of anxiousness, but that's particularly been pronounced as a result of the pandemic. And quantities later, but in maths we've returned to in-person exams this year, so again there was a lot of anxiety from our students around that. So, like we said before, the idea was we decided to set up these study skills workshops, and again this is across the university, so it's really Sue's the star of the show, delivering central sessions and in various departments, one of which was the maths department, so I'm more here as a case study, as an example about the one we delivered in maths. The workshops themselves then, well, one of the key things about these workshops were that they were created collaboratively. So we've got the Learning Enhancement Team, academic skills community, bringing their experience. You've got academic departments, giving that subject-specific perspective. We worked with our student wellbeing officer as well, who has, again, a wealth of experience and specialty subjects. And again, using students to help us design the sessions as well, students as partners, and as I say, partners in delivering it as well. So all the workshops, you can imagine, they all had a sort of similarities, shared points, right? So all of them were providing students, and this was the key thing, with a framework, with a timetable, because that's sort of step one to help them structure their studying and their revision. The central sessions, so they're more generic sessions, we're focusing on generic exam technique, but also were developed for all students such that there were sessions, activities that were specific to all types of exam questions, so essay questions, maths questions, and then the student could pick what was relevant for them. The departmental sessions then could have that more targeted subject-specific support, so things that are perhaps only relevant for your specific subject. Like I say, in our maths example, we returned to in-person exams, and a sort of COVID mitigation measure, or so we thought, was to allow the students to bring in crib sheets into those exams. We'd not done that before. So the students wanted, before we ran the sessions, we asked the students what they wanted from the sessions, and this overwhelmingly was what they were saying, help with constructing these crib sheets. And also, we call it exam paper deconstruction. So it's this idea that sort of looking at the mechanism, the framework of an exam, and using that to help you with your exam technique. And something that to return to the very first point I made on this slide, what's really useful about running these sessions collaboratively is that actually I think it was really useful for Sue, somebody external, to say, look, I'm not a maths lecturer, but I can look at this and I can see they always ask you this kind of question here and so on. So I think they really liked seeing that, oh, okay, this is a skill that somebody can learn. Also, I was a bit reluctant to be saying things because it might look like I'm giving inside information, like I know what's on the exam and I'm telling them that that's what question 1 is, whereas if Sue says it, they know that that's not the case. Similarly, if a student's telling them something, again, they're sort of aware that that's a student insight, but they're not knowing that the student knows what's going to come up on question 3. So again, just to really give you a flavour of what these sessions were, we really made sure they were workshops. So they weren't like one of these parallel talks, they were like one of the workshops that's going on in another room, so they were actually producing the revision timetable in the session. That was important. We were getting them to reflect and then develop that skill of reflective practice that they could use as they move forward with their studying. And again, linking to employability criteria so they can see the relevance of this thing, not just for their exams, but for the next stage as well. Right, so let's hear from James. Hopefully we can hear what James has to say.
Hello, I'm James, a third year maths student. Unfortunately, I'm unable to join you today, but it's a pleasure to speak with you. I was invited to a study skills workshop to help first year maths students with preparing their crib sheets from a student's perspective and tell them about how I revise for exams. Now here I've got one of my crib sheets. There's lots going on here in order to maximise the space. I shared tips on how to make the best use of space, which was very beneficial to me because I feel like my memory skills have declined since the pandemic. I explained how it wasn't necessary to remember every detail, but to focus more on the applications in a math setting and that simply that the results exist and they're there for your disposal, ultimately putting a different focus on the way I revised. And then Jess gave a contrasting view, where if you spend more time learning the results, then you don't need to spend exam time looking them up on your crib sheet. Now this was a good thing, I think, the contrasting advice, because revision is an activity which is so personal to the learner, and there isn't just one correct way to revise. Now on reflection, I think the study skills workshop was well received, but I'd suggest holding it earlier in the year. There were revision strategies I wanted to suggest, but the study skills workshop was held 2 weeks before exams begun, and I wasn't keen on recommending strategies which weren't possible in the short time frame before exams. I think allowing more time between the study skills workshop and exams could have led to better crib sheets and perhaps better results.
Thank you, James.
Hello.
No. Right, so thank you. So moving on to feedback and reflections from the session. This surprised me. We had about 60 odd kind of bits of feedback across a number of different workshops. And I thought everybody was going to go, wow, Sue, the advice that you gave on exams was brilliant, and it was really useful to me. And fundamentally, the thing that they picked up was actually producing a timetable, which really surprised me. It's like that's the thing that they found most useful. And all of the words that pretty much came up was about timetable, it was a study, and it was about taking breaks, it was about finding resources and planning and timetable and stuff. And I found that really surprising because I just assumed that everybody would know how to put a plan together, and that would be the thing that actually they would know, and why are we teaching them this? And we sort of developed the timetable over a period of time. So I did a workshop with a student wellbeing officer, and she had quite a complicated kind of physics timetable with lots of different sections on it. When I did it in a generic session, I kind of simplified it a bit more and stopped talking about doing things 9 to 5, because actually recognising that students may have jobs and may be cramming stuff in. So making it a bit more kind of simplified and make it relevant to them. But this really surprised me. It's not what I was expecting at all. And then overwhelmingly, the thing that they were going to do from the session was then studying, kind of putting together a timetable, putting together a plan, And I think just trying to get an understanding that what we think and assume that students know how to do, actually, we might need to give them a bit of time in sessions to actually put a plan together and think about when do we start it? When do we start telling them actually you should be thinking about putting together either a revision timetable or a study timetable and looking at the time. And the student wellbeing officer was very good at saying, chunks of time. You need to spend time doing stuff that you enjoy doing, stuff that you're studying, and another time for yourself, you're sleeping or working or whatever. And very often students are anxious about they need to be studying all the time, and actually the recognition that you need to break time up into these sections. So I thought that was really interesting in terms of what came out of it. And then James will give us some feedback as well.
Now to answer the big questions from this talk from a student's perspective, I think that embedding the study skills workshops within a module allows students to see their study skills in action. During the autumn term, I was involved in the Maths Department's peer-assisted learning scheme, where I led sessions to help students with their probability and statistics module. One thing we discussed was how to approach assignments and how to ask good questions in order to receive maximum help, whilst being aware of academic misconduct and how to avoid it. Students have told me how they have been able to apply this advice presented in the peer-assisted learning sessions in their other modules. To answer the question about optimal timing for a study skills workshop, I think that there are a number of valid arguments to be had here. Whilst my discussion about crib sheets might have been better if it had been earlier in the year, perhaps the end of the spring term, some pieces of advice are best shared closer to the exams. For instance, demonstrating how to approach exam questions and understanding the command words on an exam is great 2 weeks before exams, but perhaps would be less optimal 2 months before exams, as this information could easily be forgotten in that time. And finally, I think that study skills workshops can work well both on a departmental level and a university level. When the focus is about well-being or time management, for instance, a workshop can support students from any department. However, I think that workshops relating to assessment and exam technique are best delivered departmentally in order to pass on the most useful information to each student. When I used to speak with older students about exams, the use of examples specific to mathematics really resonated with me personally, but hearing advice about studying and exams from students from other departments meant much less to me.
Thank you, James. No. Goodness me.
Let's get going, James.
So, as James said, timing for the students is crucial, I think, depending what you're talking about, whether you're talking about sort of generic study skills or generally putting together a revision timetable or more specifically exam techniques. So that's really important. We found that the better sessions and that were the ones that were actually timetabled in the department. So students actually had them in the timetable. And the best ones were the ones that were actually located in the departments as well. More students kind of turned up because it was felt to be actually part of the module. The ones that were slightly less successful were the ones that were odd times or not necessarily in the department itself. And making sure they are relevant to students so that you can see the benefit of them. So, what the name of it is and sort of integrating it with modules was actually really important. And setting out what they're going to get out of it, so getting some feedback from students about what they want and what they want to know about is also really important. Like I said, I just assumed that the timetable stuff they would know that, and actually the exam stuff would be more interesting, but it was actually the other way around generally. And giving them the opportunity during those sessions to actually do that, so you're not just saying you need to produce a timetable, you need to reflect on what feedback you've got. The session in physics was actually as a result of lower than expected exam results for earlier exams, so it was actually trying to get them to think about what do they need to do to get better results. So and they went through some actually exam questions during the session there, so that was really useful as well. And then, like Jess says, collaboration between departments and learning enhancement, because and the student wellbeing officer actually, because there's 3 different perspectives and they see students in different ways. So it's always useful to have a collaboration there because you get different points of view coming across. So really open to you, and if you've got any questions, so, does it resonate? I mean, there's a few students here today, so, which is great because we can get your feedback if we missed anything, or, should it be embedded in modules? When's the best timing of these? Are the department generic sessions more useful, or is there a space for both? So over to you, and thank you for listening.
I think his name James.
James,
was absolutely right about having things that topics that are more relevant earlier on. But just from my experience, like you say, exams cause a lot of anxiety, and a very big response to anxiety is avoiding it. So earlier sessions, it might be more of a thing of putting it off. But I don't think that you should not do that. I think then putting out those resources on the VLE or something like that for everyone to access, and announcing that would be a good way to deal with people who might avoid it until later but still be able to access it.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah. And I guess to kind of add on to that, it's also because I like to know things in advance. So I'm going to book and I want to know everything now. Whereas some people are going to the end. And I think even when it comes to, I think it was exam from onwards. I sat an exam last month, and I sort of understand what happened. And I don't understand what the word means. So I think it'd be good to kind of have module or exam department specific kind of commanders, and maybe partner with the lecturers or whatever, and be maybe this is what this means, because you can read the question and one person might understand it fully, and I'm spending 20 minutes trying to understand it, and I can move on. And then I also think that having things like the timetable one earlier on, but also maybe a follow-up to also a reminder, because to exam period, because again for each person optimum time is different. So I might be team advanced, so I might be team last minute. How does that work? And then I think with generic sessions, again, kind of having things throughout the year, but also on the day, just so that if I wanted to access myself and learn and focus in, but it's good to see because I came to the extra time we've actually got work. So
absolutely, No, and Tamlin gave me some feedback on the generic sessions as well. So we do reflect and kind of respond to feedback and say what is important at the time. So thanks for that. Yeah.
I think kind of backing off what you said, when we think about timing, I think essentially it's less when the session's actually held and more how far in advance it's told about the session. So for example, I remember being told about a reading session and I really wanted to go on, but they told about it a week before the session, and I feel like my life is planned very far in advance. I had something at that time on that day, it was previously free, by the time on nothing. So 4 months earlier, something was booked for that day, which I can't now change. But they told me about this really important revision session a week before, but I can't now cancel on something that I accepted 4 months prior. So when we think about timing, I think it's also timing the announcements of the sessions.
Because that's so.
Appreciate things early and late, but you just need to be able to attend them. Never mind when it actually isn't on.
That's like Sue's saying. So get it on the timetable at the same time. Everything goes on your timetable, and then we did reminders, like you're saying, at various points. But that's really we found that as well. You're saying you saw that with feet on the ground.
And even with the generic session, we only decided later on to put it into the session, but we now know, given the feedback we've got, that we will actually put it into the schedule in advance. And like you say, and because we've got this consolidation week now and these revision weeks, we've got more opportunity to know when to put it into the timetable, because we know when these are in advance. So that's going to make it easier for us as well. So thanks for that. Any other questions?
Can I just ask you maybe a silly question about the crib sheet thing?
Right,
The country, can they put as much as they want on that?
You saw James's, did you?
Yeah,
Yeah. This has been quite it's quite controversial in the department. So we've just, as I say, so this is we're going off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's still interesting. We thought, going back to in-person exams, they've been doing online exams where they've had the notes. So, like we say, we were trying to reduce the anxiety by giving them the crib sheet as for a number of things. Yeah, we'll hold it up in a minute. There you go. So the rule was, let's just maximise him so you can really see the full joy of that. But they've got front and back, right? The rule was a piece of A4 and you can do anything with it. So there's not really a rule, it's just the rule is one side of A4, one sheet of A4. Yeah, but, and it's so interesting, this is why I really liked, it's so good to have the PAL leaders helping you with these things, because the language I was thinking about whether we're going to allow crib sheets moving forward or have it as a default policy. They said you've got 2 places to store things on the crib sheet and in your head, and as lecturers we were sort of saying no. It needs to be in your head, the crib sheet's just a double check, and that's the problem we've sort of run into with crib sheets. So, yeah, and that's, again, I think that was really interesting when we said to the students, what do you want us to do in the sessions? And they said, help us build crib sheets, because we'd sort of thought, oh, this is a nice thing we can do for the students, like I say, help them with the anxiety. And then kind of thought, well, they'll be able to work out how to do it. It's a study skill. Making a good crib sheet is a study skill. I'm not sure that this is a good crib sheet. It certainly wouldn't be for me, right? But it obviously was for James because he did fantastic in his exams. So, yeah, it's a study skill. You do something like that, you need to help students to understand how to harness that potential of that skill.
Yeah, I was going to say, like...
well, we just had a board of studies meeting where we were debating this, and so they polled the students, and the students overwhelmingly wanted to keep them.
As a student, like, I hear my parents going, you're cheating yourself.
Yeah.
Because how much of a leave learning, and then also, let's say my lecturers consider what the question is. Do you check my crib sheet to see if it's all of this particular topic?
Yeah, no, we didn't check them whatsoever. We had lots of, so basically, I'll cut a very long story short. What we've decided, moving forward at least for next year, is that crib sheets won't be allowed in what we consider core modules, so first year, second year, because you need that stuff to do third year, and that's absolutely why. So as a lecturer, I might like 200 exams. Things that we call it a core module because you need it, you know, for this module next year. So we're setting questions that rely on stuff that they're supposed to have, and they don't have it because it's here, it's not here. So they're not in first and second year, but in third and fourth year, at the moment as a default, yes, you can have it. Because, like I said, but it's really instructing people that it's there to reduce your anxiety, and as a double check, it's not the place where you don't learn this, you need to know it, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Sorry, totally stolen. James has stolen the show with his crib sheet, hasn't he?
With the thing about having generic sessions or departmental sessions, if those are being kept for third and fourth years, I think departmental sessions might be more helpful, just because what I would put as a psychology student on a crib sheet is very different from what you put on his crib sheet, just because it's like some are more research based, some are more knowing like about equations and things like that. So either like combining departments like humanities and stuff to have a general thing for that, or specific ones.
Yeah, or like, so you might not have them in your department, so you'd be like, why are we spending ages making crib sheets? Although everybody agreed it's a good revision tool to make this thing even don't take it into the exam on the day. So I think that's really useful. Thank you very much. Yes. Anyway,
thank you very much.
That is the end of the session.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still on crib sheets.